Crown of Thorns and Desire. Previous episodes are available on playlist. A link is given in the video description. Episode 6. Oh my! Kanye covered her mouth but couldn't help exclaiming. Before her stood a castle, surrounded by mountains, shrouded in the heavy morning mist of winter, making the towering spires appear and disappear among the swaying trees, like a scene from a fairy tale. He held her arm as they crossed a suspension bridge. As they approached the castle, the view was different from that seen from the bridge. The tall buildings were constructed of blue stone, with narrow windows and irregular spires, all in a Gothic style. This place has been abandoned for a long time. The last monarch, who was infatuated with indulgence, left the Bavarian royal family in significant debt, he explained to her. This castle was built at the end of the last century, and to distinguish it from the nearby Hohenschwangau castle, it was named Neuschwanstein. As a descendant of the Meyer family, I am honored to show you around. They did not enter from the front but instead approached a side door. An elderly servant with graying hair awaited them, bowing to him before using a brass key to unlock the heavy iron door. With a creak, the iron door swung open. Kanye followed him through a stone corridor overgrown with climbing roses. It was eerily quiet, adding to the castle's mystery, with only their footsteps echoing. Clearly, few people visited here, the dried vines almost covered the path. He walked ahead, drawing his sword to clear some thorns, trying to make a path for her. She felt like the prince in Sleeping Beauty, cutting through the thorns to enter the castle of the sleeping princess, as if in that tall white tower, in a sealed room, a crystal coffin held a sleeping princess. Though she had been asleep for 100 years, her skin remained as white as snow, and her lips as red as roses. She lay in that pointed tower, filled with expectations of love, seemingly peacefully asleep, yet waiting for a brave and passionate prince to awaken her. They entered a grand hall, adorned with an extravagant crystal chandelier and opulent golden decorations, all covered in a thick layer of dust that could not hide their dazzling brilliance. In the center, an altar-like screen depicted the story of Jesus's triumph. She did not approach it but instead focused on the portraits hanging on either side. "Who is this?" she asked, gazing at the young brown-haired man in the painting. "This is Ludwig II, dressed in a blue robe and yellow cloak, the representative colors of the Bavarian royal family. Unfortunately, Bavaria lost to Prussia." Beside him was a portrait of a woman, a standard half-length depiction, wearing a white gauzy dress, her voluminous brown hair styled at the back, adorned with jewels at her chest and a crown atop her head, making her appear even more noble and enchanting. "What a beauty," he said softly. "It is rumored that Ludwig II loved his cousin, but this love would lead to no happy ending. Politically unsuccessful, he turned his affections to Wagner's theatrical world, immersing himself in the fantasies of those romantic knightly tales. Let's go see the theater he built." Kanye glanced at the two portraits once more and followed him into another grand hall. "Don't you like theater? Half a century ago, This hall was brightly lit every night, showcasing Wagner's dramas, he said, his voice echoing in the empty hall. Now, it has fallen into disrepair. She looked up, surveying the walls adorned with paintings depicting the tales of knights, illustrating the love story between the handsome swan knight Lohengrin and the beautiful Princess Rebecca. "We need light," he raised his voice, and suddenly the lights on the walls flickered to life. She stepped back in astonishment as the figures in the paintings seemed to come alive under the illumination. "This is not magic, just a remote control device." He walked toward the central stage, raising his left arm. "This cursed place often drives people mad, doesn't it?" He stepped into the center of the stage, raising his voice, reciting solemnly, "Apologies, I was quoting the most frequently performed drama on this stage, Wagner's Lohengrin. It means, never ask where I come from, my name and identity." Kanye looked at the stage, where the tall man in a black cloak stood, loudly narrating the story. "The Princess Rebecca is accused of murdering her brother the Duke's heir. The Swan Knight Lohengrin appears to fight for Rebecca's honor, defeating the accuser, Count Telramund. That foolish woman, out of doubt and jealousy, questioned his sincerity, asking the forbidden question. The great Swan Knight could only return to the land of the Covenant after revealing his identity, forever guarding the Holy Grail." Kanye stood in the audience, not interrupting him, even though she was very familiar with the entire plot, having once been captivated by Wagner's romantic dramas. This hall reminded her of the performances of that play, and this castle transported her into the world of the drama, blurring the lines between reality and illusion, reality and dreams. The tall, handsome man with golden hair and blue eyes standing in the center of the stage resembled a noble knight in black. He stepped down from the stage, walking toward her step by step until he stood before her, lowering his head to gaze into her eyes, lowering his voice. A godlike man and a mortal woman, a romantic longing and encounter, yet their love was doomed from the start, containing the seeds of tragedy. But they still needed and desired each other. Perhaps only Rebecca's love could redeem him, and only his love could make her heart, already filled with love, feel it more vividly and truly. "That's just your interpretation," she averted her gaze from his. "I don't have a deep understanding of Wagner's dramas." "All right, let's go see the top floor." He led her through the corridor, stopping beneath a portrait of a woman, gazing deeply into the blue eyes of the woman in the painting. This is another woman related to him, another love story. She is Sophie Charlotte, the sister of the Austrian princess, who was once engaged to Ludwig II. They were recognized as a perfect couple, often dressing as the Swan Knight and Princess Rebecca, inseparable. But in the end, she married a duke. Kanye looked at the portrait. The woman in the painting was entirely different from the noble, beautiful, serene, and slightly melancholic brown-haired woman before. She had a head of light golden waves, and her bright blue eyes sparkled like the sea, exuding a dreamlike charm, resembling a princess from a fairy tale. He gazed at the woman in the painting for a while, seemingly lost in thought, then extended his left arm, signaling her to proceed down the left corridor. The corridor was dark, and she felt a bit anxious as she followed him, passing through a spiral staircase until he pushed open another door, and the entire world suddenly brightened again. They had reached the highest point of the castle. The wind howled in her ears. This winter was very cold. The Swan Lake behind the castle was completely frozen, like a giant blue ice mirror, reflecting the beautiful illusion of Neuschwanstein. What a beautiful place, but unfortunately, every love legend about this castle ends in tragedy, he said, lowering his gaze, staring at the pristine lake and the snow-capped peaks in the distance, the white snow covering the mountains matching the color of his eyes. If only love in this world had no regrets, Kanye shivered from the wind atop the tower. He glanced at her, removed his black wool cloak, and gently wrapped it around her. The heavy black cloak completely covered her petite frame, reaching his knees but falling below her calves, shielding her from the biting cold. She lowered her head, the wind making it hard for her to open her eyes, yet she did not resist as he tied the belt, for it was the first time she felt that this black uniform could bring a hint of warmth. He appeared tall and thin in just a uniform coat, almost frail, with thick bandages wrapped around his arm, stained with spots of crimson blood, his light golden hair tousled by the wind. "It's too windy here, let's go back," she said, turning to slip through the iron door of the tower. He followed her into the dark corridor, where he suddenly stopped, as if confessing something to her or speaking to himself. "Perhaps I have sold many things for profit, but I have always held on to love." Kanye paused, lowering her head and quickening her pace, almost running down the spiral staircase. In the darkness, she could hide her inner unease. In fact, from the moment he brought her to this castle, she gradually began to believe in everything. She understood why that melancholic king, who always held on to romantic ideals, did not concern himself with politics and preferred to wander alone at night. This young monarch, so out of touch with the world, could connect so well with the iron-willed Chancellor Bismarck, for everyone has a castle in their heart, the purest and holiest realm like heaven. Kanye returned to the golden hall ahead of him. He walked toward her from the corridor, looking at her and saying, "Tonight we will stay here, the steward has prepared a room for us. Soon, he will take you to your room. Of course, there are many stories in this castle and many places worth seeing." "No, I want to go back," she suddenly refused. "What are you saying?" He squinted in disbelief. "Please take me back to that house. I don't want to stay here tonight." He stood still, his ice blue eyes silently watching her petite figure wrapped in his black cloak step further away until she disappeared at the end of the golden hall. The fire spread quickly and fiercely, causing severe damage to the rooms on the second floor. The situation on the first floor and in the basement was somewhat better, with only the walls blackened by smoke. After a day of emergency repairs, some rooms were basically usable again. Kanye returned to the villa once more. Living in this house, she could enter every room with peace of mind, except for the study. She dared not step inside even once. She feared the black piano, feared the crisp sound it made, as if she could hear the crack of her own bones breaking. But the sound of the piano clearly rang out again, playing the melody of "What a Beautiful Jasmine Flower." Kenyi instinctively looked at her hands. Although they could still perform basic movements, she could no longer play the piano. Due to a tendon rupture, her 10 fingers could no longer grasp the precise rhythm or traverse the wide range of notes. The music was beautiful and lyrical, not the sound of a piano, but that of a violin. Who could be playing this melody of her hometown in the night? The strings resonated smoothly and subtly, rich and pure. Drawn in by the melodious and lyrical music, she stepped into this room filled with countless terrifying memories. The study was unlit, and under the tranquil moonlight, a tall, slender figure stood. He held the violin against his collarbone, gently resting his chin on it, his left shoulder slightly raised, and his right hand skillfully drew the bow. A series of notes swayed out from the gentle friction between the strings and the bow, echoing in the moonlit air, like delicate jasmine petals falling softly onto the water's surface. He slowly lowered the violin from his shoulder, holding it in one hand and the bow in the other, standing upright by the windowsill. He did not speak, only quietly gazed at her with his ice-blue eyes. Outside, under the night sky, the moonlight cast a clear glow over his golden hair, his broad shoulders, and slender waist, enveloping him in a faint halo. She suddenly realized she had been staring at him for too long, as if a piece of music had lasted an eternity, yet it felt like just a fleeting moment. She tried hard to avert her gaze from him, but had to admit a fact: her eyes had already been conquered by him. Not just her eyes, the melodious tune of the violin still echoed in her ears. He put down the violin and smiled at her, parting his lips as if reciting poetry, but what came from his mouth were the lyrics of the song. What a beautiful jasmine flower, what a beautiful jasmine flower, this beauty in full bloom scents the air and deserves lots of praise for its sweet and white. Let me pick some flowers and send to others. Oh, jasmine flowers, jasmine flowers. After reciting these lines, a hint of awkwardness appeared on his lips. I know that English is insufficient to convey the essence of this song. Please forgive me, I cannot translate it completely into German, and my African is not good enough to sing it. Upon hearing his words, she lifted her head and inadvertently met his gaze for a second. He restrained his smile, and the ice blue in his eyes released a pure, cold flame. She knew that the temperature of that flame could melt her in an instant, so she chose to lower her head, fixating on the cracks in the floor, determined not to look into his eyes again. Yet he continued to gaze at her, his palm gently caressing her cheek. My angel, you are as delicate, lovely, pure, and fragrant as the jasmine flower in the lyrics, he spoke to himself. I know you must hate me deep down. She turned her face away, neither answering nor denying, but her chest was heaving violently. So he continued to speak as if to himself, please forgive me for everything I've done to you. I have left scars on your feet, preventing you from dancing, and broken your fingers, preventing you from playing the piano. But all of this is because of love. Yes, because I love you. Although at that time, I did not understand the intense throbbing buried deep in my heart that could erupt at any moment. I had no reason to approach you, so I could only use brutality to break open your heart. I could not bear anyone sharing your beauty, so I chose to kill everyone who tried to get close to you, even if it meant destroying you. She kept her head down, not seeing the expression in his eyes as he spoke these words. Suddenly, he pulled her close, gripping her shoulder tightly, causing her pain. She heard him continue to say above her forehead, "Because I realized I have fallen in love with you. I whip you, torment you, just to prove that I do not love you. But love is not a mathematical formula, it cannot be proven by logic and reason. The harsher I punish you, the more uncontrollably I love you. No. Enough. Ryan, I cannot accept this, this love is too insane." She pushed him away, feeling that if she did not resist, she would be completely occupied by him. "You abuse me so crazily and say it is because you love me. If one day you kill me, you would also say it is because you love me." He did not immediately step forward to embrace her or continue to hold her hand. Instead, he remained rooted in place, his hands outstretched toward her, emitting a low voice that seemed to come from the depths of darkness. "No, I will not kill you. Of course, according to my nature, I would kill you, but I cannot bring myself to do it." Kenyi frantically averted her gaze from his ice-blue eyes. She believed that what he said at that moment was true, and the love he expressed was also genuine. But no matter what, she could not accept that he could be so cruel yet so romantic. His extreme romance was intertwined with extreme cruelty. Why did he always give her such extreme feelings? She was accustomed to moderation and elegance, a balance of strength and gentleness. This was not the civilization her heart yearned for. "No, do not push me toward such an extreme situation of either this or that." He took a step forward, still gazing at her, but his hands did not touch her. "You African people always act with elegance and restraint. I do not want to be like the lyrics, wanting to pick this beautiful flower but hesitating and being timid. That is not me. What race of woman you are does not matter, what matters is that I want you. Yes, I want you, this pure and fragrant little jasmine. But the way you love flowers is not to admire and respect them, but to disdainfully pluck them, to toy with them in your hands, and when you grow tired of them, to trample them under your black military boots." She shook her head vigorously, feeling her emotions rising uncontrollably again. "Perhaps you can disdain my body, but you can never seize my soul." He stepped forward again, lowering his head to gaze at her downcast face. "Look at me, Kenyi, look into my eyes. Let those formalities go to hell. I want you, and I will have you. Your body and your soul will belong to me. I will make you realize that your soul also longs for this. No, I do not long for it, and I do not love you, not at all. She rejected him bluntly, like a little fish trying to escape from the net woven by his ice-blue gaze. But he clearly would not give her the chance to slip away again. He stared at her, his fingertips gently brushing her lips, softly saying, "What are you thinking? You must be hesitating, trying to resist. Those beautiful, dark eyes easily betray your heart. I feel sorry because I want to suppress it too, but what can be rationally suppressed is not called love." He gently lifted her face, once again solemnly inviting her, "Can ye look into my eyes?" He had cold eyes, yet they radiated flames, a scorching heat like the sun. One more glance, and she would be reduced to ashes. One step forward, and it would be an abyss. She trembled, her shoulders shaking as she sobbed, "I do not want to look, I will be burned to ashes by your gaze. Then let us turn to ashes together." He used his thumb to wipe away the tears at the corners of her eyes. His lips were so hot. She closed her eyes, inhaling his scorching breath, feeling as if she would truly melt away. He lifted her up, and her mind felt blank, the ceiling spinning above her. He carried her up the stairs, into the bedroom on the second floor, gently placing her on the bed. She still stared at him blankly, her hands instinctively covering her chest under his gaze. Her chest felt a bit tight, and her cheeks were slightly warm, not knowing when they had turned crimson. He saw her sitting on the edge of the bed with her legs together, her hands tightly covering her chest, her head lowered shyly. So he gently leaned down, half kneeling beside her, allowing her to look down and see his face. He quietly gazed at her, closely examining her face, eyes, and lips, gently stroking her black hair, not wanting to give her any sense of pressure, not even a little. He waited like this for a long time, until his knees felt somewhat numb, but he did not change his position, remaining still. He seemed like a mischievous child waiting for a little bird pecking at the ground to hop into the trap he had set. At this moment, even the slightest sound would startle the bird, causing it to flap its wings and fly away. He took her small hand, opening her palm and placing it against his cheek. "My angel, you are truly beautiful," he whispered in admiration, and her cheeks flushed even more. His fingertips gently touched his warm skin. He was so handsome, with a high nose and deep-set eyes. From the moment he picked her up until now, her head had been spinning. They were so close that she could hear each other's breathing. "My angel, your black hair is so beautiful," he leaned closer to her hair, closing his eyes and deeply inhaling at the crown of her head. A series of gentle kisses fell on her strands of hair. Her hand slowly climbed from his side to his golden hair, which was a light shade of gold, with naturally curly waves at the ends. Her delicate fingers playfully stirred through those waves, making his hair a bit messy. "My angel, your black eyes are like obsidian, clear and transparent, the most enchanting eyes I have ever seen." He slightly lowered his head and gently kissed her eyes. She trembled at his kiss, opening her eyes to look into his. Those deep-set eyes, with golden lashes and ice-blue pupils, lacked the coercive cold light. Instead, they were irresistibly gentle, as if they wanted to draw her in. "My angel, your lips are so beautiful," with the enticing curve of rose petals and the charming fragrance of jasmine. His lips drew close to hers, gently brushing against them, softly savoring the intoxicating fragrance, reluctantly pulling away from her lips. Her gaze fell on his lips, which were relatively thin, well-defined, with a honey-glazed color and a sensual curve. Her small hand could not help but caress his lips. He continued, "Why are you so beautiful? Every inch of your skin tempts me, telling me what to do if I cannot restrain myself here." He held her hand, pressing it against his shirt over his chest. Through the thick winter fabric, she felt as if she could touch his heartbeat. He suddenly pulled her head back, pressing it against his chest, trembling slightly as he said, "Do you hear it? It beats for you, throbs for you, boils for you." She truly heard it, the sound of his heartbeat, so clear that her own heart raced in response. She buried her head again, gently pressing her face against his chest. She could feel him wrapping his arms around her, holding her tightly in his embrace. His embrace was so warm, filled with a strong masculine scent. This time, there was no feeling of danger or violation. Instead, it made her feel safe and warm. The warm morning light woke her up. As soon as she opened her eyes, she saw his gaze. He was already awake, his ice-blue pupils resembling a clear pool. Her dark eyes darted around, unsure where to look. She smiled at him awkwardly, her face quickly turning red. "You see, you still smiled at me, you two-faced woman." His tone seemed somewhat mocking, but his gaze deepened. At that moment, he had truly waited for a long time. Although her smile was forced, it was still captivating. "Not smiling, should I cry?" She turned her back, and he hugged her tightly from behind. "No, no crying. I do not want to see you in tears," he said, kissing her shoulder deeply, his lightly furrowed brow making his eye sockets appear even deeper. "Your tears will break my heart." She closed her eyes, but her lips could not hide her smile. Her heart felt like a piece of chocolate melting rapidly in the flames, sweetening her in an instant. She did not want him to see that a single sentence could make her so happy and proud, but she also wanted to respond to him. She reached back, gently wrapping her arms around his back, her fingertips feeling the rough texture. She remembered the terrifying scars on his back. "How did you get those scars on your back? Does this scar frighten you?" His deep voice resonated from behind her head. She nodded, but more than fear, it was heartache that dominated her feelings. "Are you a noble? Your name has von in it, Friedrich Albert von Ryan." She recited his name, her ankle tattooed with his name. He was a descendant of the Albert family, the owner of Swan Castle. Noble? Before that man abandoned my mother and me. As for that scar, it was left by my adoptive father. He was a Puritan, who firmly believed that humans are born sinful, even a child is no exception. He would whip me every morning and evening in place of God, and he found a very convincing reason for it, to prevent my soul from going to hell after I died. He spoke calmly, as if the person he mentioned had nothing to do with him. How could it be like this? A child is the most innocent and naive. Even if they occasionally make mistakes, it is not their fault. Kanye felt indignant for his childhood experiences, sighed deeply, and murmured, "At the beginning of man, nature is good, people are similar, but habits differ. If not taught, nature will change. Are you reciting poetry?" He propped himself up on his arm, examining her profile. Her long eyelashes fluttered, and hearing her speak in the language of her hometown, the rhythm of her speech resembled poetry. She did not answer him, her dark eyes were filled with sorrow. "It, speak in a language I understand." He pulled her arm, forcing her to face him. Kanye looked innocently into his ice blue eyes. "I do not know how to express it to you, it is the three-character classic we start reading as children." Her clear gaze and earnest explanation satisfied him, slightly calming his emotions. "Do you want to hear more?" There was a hint of reluctance in her eyes, but she truly wanted to continue listening, so she nodded. "He whipped me, starting with a rattan stick, and later with an iron whip. He punished me by making me fast for 7 days. I accidentally killed him, terrified, and escaped from that home under the cover of night. If I remember correctly, it was shortly after my 12th birthday." He fell silent for a moment, squinting his ice blue eyes, his expression somewhat stiff. "But later, how did you?" she asked cautiously. He immediately understood her meaning, thought for a moment, and politely declined to answer her question. "Baby, this involves secrets of the Imperial team, and I cannot tell you too much. Besides, knowing too much is not beneficial." He paused, trying to explain to her, "As long as you learn when to show loyalty and when to betray and sell out, it is easy to gain promotion." Kanye nodded obediently, understanding that he meant no harm. He no longer continued to explain, reaching for a cigarette from the box on the bedside table, tapping it lightly, then using a lighter to ignite it, taking a gentle puff as white smoke flowed softly from his nostrils. She rested her head against his chest. His chest muscles were solid, somewhat mismatched with his sharp face. She closed her eyes, hearing his steady heartbeat. Why was he so adept at using violence? Why was he so indulgent in? One extreme often leads to another. Suppression is not a solution. She suddenly recalled a saying she had heard from her private tutor, which she had not understood well at the time, and her father had not allowed her to ask further. Now it seemed to apply to this situation. She murmured to herself, "This is truly food, nature. Are you reciting poetry again? He lowered his ice blue gaze to look at her, this time with a hint of gentle amusement. It is not poetry. This saying was made by a sage of our African culture, meaning that the desires for food and between men and women are part of human nature. We must face its existence, neither excessively suppressing it nor indulging it too much. She looked at him, explaining earnestly. Your ancestors are very right, he said, his blue eyes shifting in depth. The fingers holding the cigarette slightly lifted, and with the other arm, he wrapped her body closer to him, the faint smoke gently wafting to her nose. But facing you, this alluring little demon, I just want to indulge, he sealed her lips. Finally, on the morning of the third day, Kanye found that she really couldn't get out of bed. He called Abigail to bring 2 breakfasts. Kanye felt very hungry because he always found ways to exhaust her energy, but she had no appetite for the beef, even though the piece in front of her was well cooked on both sides. She picked up a plate of salad made of vegetables and fruits from the bedside table, which was clearly prepared by Abigail just for her. You little rabbit! He held up his cup, swallowed a mouthful of red wine, and frowned as he watched her stuff leafy greens into her mouth with a crunch, crunch. No wonder you're so thin, turns out you only eat grass and leaves. He placed her well-cooked steak in front of her. Kanye shook her head. It wasn't that she wasted food, but in her mind, breakfast should include some vegetables, and she wasn't used to eating such a large piece of beef. Drink this glass of milk. He set down the plate of steak, snatched the salad bowl from her hands, and picked up a glass filled with milk from the bedside table, placing it in front of her again, this time with a somewhat firm tone. Kanye obediently took the glass of milk from his hands and, bringing it to her lips, tilted her head back and gulped down half of it with a glug, glug. She pouted and frowned slightly. In fact, she didn't particularly like drinking milk, especially European milk, which she felt had a strong fishy smell, perhaps due to the different breeds of cows. Kanye suddenly thought of the tea leaves from her hometown. How wonderful it would be to have a cup of clear tea right now. That's a good girl, he said, his large hand running through her soft black hair, watching as she took the last sip of milk. Drink up, I want your chest to be a bit bigger. At his words, she puffed and sprayed all the milk she had just swallowed, coughing uncontrollably. Can you not speak so crudely? She protested, her face flushed. He stared at the white milk foam left on her tender red lips and chuckled softly. There's something even cruder. Do you want to hear it? No, no. She suddenly leaned back, not realizing she was already sitting on the edge of the bed, and accidentally tumbled off. He quickly got up, trying to grab her arm, but his hand slipped, and he missed. She had already fallen to the floor, one hand covering her forehead, tears glistening in the corners of her eyes as she sniffled, "Ouch, it hurts." A small bump had formed on her forehead from hitting the bed's edge, a dull ache. He lowered his head slightly, first looking at her with concern for a moment, realizing she had just bumped into something and was not bleeding. Finally, he couldn't help but burst into loud laughter. Kenyi was very displeased with this guy who took pleasure in her misfortune. She glared at him fiercely, stood up, and huffed in a deliberately angry manner, then turned her head to pretend to ignore him, walking barefoot to the bookshelf nearby. On it were neatly arranged some hardcover books, and in the middle layer were several wooden frames, but there were no photos inside. Instead, the transparent glass held shiny metal medals. So many badges. Her finger brushed against one of the frames. Each medal was exquisitely crafted and beautifully designed. They always liked to wear various medals over their black uniforms, symbolizing supreme honor, but looking at these, she felt a strange emotion welling up inside her. He leaned against the headboard, slightly raising his head, squinting as he said, "Starting from your left, the first one is the Silver National Sports Medal, the second is the National Silver Equestrian Medal, the two side by side are the Silver and Gold Assault Team Medals, the third frame contains the slightly square South African National Sports Medal, behind it is the Grand Cross Collection Medal, the Cavalier de Gran Croce, the Yugoslav Royal Medal, the St. Nicholas Sava Grand Cross, the second-class Danzig Cross, and there are some that won't fit in the drawer. I originally kept these in the study, but because of that fire," he didn't continue, closing his mouth with a smile. His tone was very calm, as if there was not a hint of boasting. As she listened to his introduction, her gaze swept over these dazzling medals, and she suddenly thought of a poem, slowly reciting, "The land of Zulu enters the war map. How can the common people plan for the joy of logging and revival? Do not speak of sealing marquee affairs. A general's success means the death of 10,000 bones. Whose famous saying is this?" He looked at her delicate back and chuckled. "This time it's a poem," she replied softly. "Oh." He propped himself up, got out of bed barefoot, took 2 steps to her back, spread his arms to wrap her in his embrace, and gently rested his sharp chin on her shoulder. "What poem is it? Don't use your hometown's intonations, I want you to translate it for me. Is it about love?" She didn't answer him, instinctively shrugging her shoulders as his warm breath brushed against her ear, making her feel ticklish. He didn't continue to ask about the content of the poem, seemingly taking her reaction as shyness, and affectionately said, "You little shy thing." Kenyi simply leaned against him. His chest was solid and warm, very comfortable to lean on. Suddenly, her eyes brightened as she spotted something unusual among the many medals. Kenyi couldn't help but reach out to take the frame that held it. The badge was attached to a wide red ribbon with black edges, featuring 5 white stripes in the center. This medal, apart from the golden fine lines for decoration, was almost entirely white enamel. At the top was an eagle emblem with wings spread, and the main part below consisted of 2 layers of crossed pentagonal ribbons, 1 gold and 1 white. The most distinctive feature was the top layer of the badge, which was a white 5-ring emblem with a golden border. She had seen this symbol when studying in the United States. Unlike the glaring black cross, this white 5-ring emblem felt so familiar. "What is this medal you just mentioned? It's so beautiful," she whispered in admiration. He wrapped his arms around her, took the frame from her hands, and with his long fingers opened the cover of the frame, taking out the medal and laying it flat in his palm. This medal was large and should be worn around the neck. Kanye had never seen him wear it. If there was a formal occasion, he usually wore a large black cross under his collar. Kanye held onto his long fingers with one hand while gently touching the 5-ring design with the other. "It's an Olympic medal, darling," he explained softly. "Olympic?" Kanye couldn't help but be a bit surprised, even though she knew the significance of this emblem. "Are you talking about the Olympic Games?" "Yes, but this isn't a medal, it's more like a commemorative badge issued by the government." "Did you participate in the Olympic Games?" She was even more astonished, her mouth agape. He smiled, feigning mystery as he said, "In fact, I won a gold medal in that competition." "What? Really? Are you an Olympic champion? In what event?" He pondered for a moment before answering, "Equestrian." "Equestrian? That's amazing." She nearly jumped up. "Do you like it that much?" He didn't follow her jubilant mood but instead slightly blinked his ice blue eyes, which sparkled with calmness, and asked in a low voice, "I have so many medals, why do you only like this one?" "Well, it's hard to say, I just think it's beautiful. Look at these 5 rings, each forming a circle, interlocking with each other. The design is clever, isn't it?" She tugged at the ribbon of the medal, turned around, and raised her arm to measure it against the prominent Adam's apple below his neck, then looked up at his face, smiling as she asked, "It must have been very interesting when you participated in the games. Tell me about the events on the field." It was indeed very interesting. Athletes from different races and countries fiercely competed on the same field, but there could only be one champion, and it depended on who was higher, faster, and stronger. "Oh," she replied, placing the medal back in the box, carefully covering it with the glass frame, and setting it back on the bookshelf. "What's wrong, darling?" It seemed she suddenly lost interest in the medal, and he asked with some confusion. In fact, just now, when those charming lights sparkled in her black eyes, he had an impulse. If she really liked it that much, he would give her this medal. Although every medal here represented personal honor and merit, which should be invaluable to him, one of the important tenets of chivalry is that when a man stands before the goddess of love and beauty he admires, there is nothing he cannot offer. She didn't seem like a wise goddess but rather like a noisy little girl. "I want to ride a horse too." "Ride a horse? All right, I can fulfill that wish." His ice blue eyes clouded over, and suddenly he tightly embraced her, whispering in her ear, "But before that, let me ride you first." Kanye lay quietly on the bed, her frail body sinking into the white mattress, feeling sore all over, lacking even the strength to speak. Her pair of shiny black eyes stared blankly out the window, where the warm afternoon sun filtered through the dark red velvet curtains and the thin brown lace curtains outside, casting golden rays into the room. The sunlight sprinkled on the bed, making her feel drowsy. Her head was heavy, counting with her fingers. It had already been 3 days, and she had spent most of her time in bed, even having breakfast and lunch there. Kanye sighed softly, noticing him lighting a cigarette, leaning back in a sunlit lounge chair, leisurely flipping through a sports magazine. Suddenly, he raised his blue eyes and said to her with interest, "This afternoon, I'll take you horseback riding." She lazily responded, curling up and hiding under the down comforter, regretting her impulsive request from the morning. In her current state, even getting out of bed to walk was difficult. How could she possibly ride a horse? Seeing her completely cocooned like a silkworm, he tossed the magazine aside, got up from the lounge chair, grabbed a handful of her black hair that was sticking out, and gently pulled her head out. Her hair was tugged a bit painfully, and she reluctantly turned her head to ask him, "What are you doing? Are you tired, darling?" He knelt on one knee beside the bed, one hand pressing on her shoulder while the other gently played with her hair. "I'm here to keep you company for a while." No, she turned her head away, presenting him with a cold back. "Come on, let's go out and get some sundae." He unceremoniously pulled back the comforter, extracting her from it and laying her flat on the floor. Thus, she was forced out of bed, angrily heading to the bathroom. After a quick wash, she looked in the mirror, tidied her hair, and used a hairpin to tie it into a simple, clean ponytail at the back of her head. She changed out of her light purple sheer nightgown and put on a light pink dress. He, too, was not in his black uniform but wore a white shirt with a khaki striped trench coat over it, brown hunting trousers, and black riding boots. He waited for her for a long time in the living room on the first floor. She finally slowly came down the stairs, and he couldn't help but frown. Clearly, she had no adequate understanding of the weather and temperature outside. Just before they were about to leave, he had to drape a thick wool shawl over her. He took her to the stable, where the officer in charge of the horses brought out a white horse. This horse was raised alone. The officer stroked its long neck, brushed its mane, and skillfully saddled it. The horse was beautiful, pure white like snow, with dark eyes. It lowered its head, walking evenly, appearing very docile. He politely thanked the caretaker and then slowly led the horse out of the stable by its reins. He lifted her onto the horse's back and mounted it himself, exiting through the small gate in the backyard, guiding the horse towards the small river at the edge of the mountains and fields, strolling along the river bank, where the stream babbled and the spring warmth enveloped everything. Everything was so peaceful and serene, although the trees were not fully green yet. The early spring atmosphere permeated the countryside. He abandoned the idea of galloping with her on the horse. She looked like she could not handle any bumps, her little face scrunched up, insisting she wanted to get down. "Darling, you shouldn't wear a skirt to ride a horse." As he helped her down, he casually glanced at the endless view beneath her pink skirt. "I don't have any other clothes." She pouted, grateful that her legs finally touched the ground. "All right, tomorrow I'll take you shopping for some clothes." He laughed heartily, took off his coat, and laid it on the ground for her to sit on. He walked a few steps forward, looking for a patch of green grass to tie the horse to a big tree so it could munch on the tender grass shoots. Kanye sat on his thick trench coat, and since the ground was already sprouting green grass tips, she didn't feel too cold. She hugged her knees, slightly turned to the side, silently gazing at him. His golden hair was so dazzling, a light shade of gold with naturally curly waves, and his eyebrows and eyelashes were also golden. No prince from any country could be more charming than him, including those from fairy tales. The warm afternoon sun by the river illuminated everything on the earth so softly. Kanye squinted against the slightly glaring sunlight and asked, "Back in the day, you won the equestrian championship riding this horse, right?" He replied, "No, I should say she was once an excellent racehorse, but she injured her leg during a training session." He gently patted the horse's hind quarters. "She can no longer perform the required jumping obstacles." "Ah, how pitiful! Did she break her leg?" "No, the veterinarian said the injury has healed, but every time she approaches an obstacle, she becomes too scared to jump," he said, gazing at the horse, which was nibbling on the grass, blinking his ice-blue eyes. "In fact, a horse like this should be put down because she has lost her value. For a thoroughbred racehorse, aside from winning championships in competitions, her life has no meaning. She's just scared. Why should she be killed?" "You are right. To stand up again after falling, to conquer one's inner fears, and to face obstacles without retreating requires immense willpower. Humans may not even be able to do it, let alone a horse. Let her live, perhaps she can give birth to a purebred foal." He gently stroked the horse's mane, and it raised its head, affectionately blowing air through its nostrils at him. Kanye nodded with a smile. "What events are there at the Olympics?" She was clearly very curious about his athlete experience and intended to dig deeper. "Dressage, show jumping, and eventing, 3 events in total." "How do they compete?" Dressage involves completing a series of required and optional movements within a specified time, including walking, trotting, and cantering. As for show jumping, he chuckled, that year, the competition was about jumping over a mud pit, and it was quite a spectacle. It wouldn't be an exaggeration to say that only 3 competitors didn't fall into the mud, if I remember correctly. After a slight pause, he continued, "And then there's eventing, which is the most grueling, requiring 3 consecutive days of competition. This tests both the athlete's and horse's physical endurance and willpower," he patiently explained to her, watching her big black eyes blink continuously, and her somewhat puzzled expression. He knew she couldn't possibly understand everything immediately, so he refrained from delving into further details. "Now, can you perform for me?" Her black eyes suddenly sparkled with anticipation as she looked at him. "I really want to see dressage." He did not immediately respond to her request but gazed at her for a moment. He didn't particularly enjoy the fixed steps of a choreographed performance dancing to music. In that competition segment, he wasn't at an advantage, rather, it was in show jumping and eventing that he stood out. He reveled in the thrill of galloping and jumping, the fierce competition, and the brutal rivalry. Yet, he never understood why women were always interested in that. However, her request was hard to refuse, and in fact, he didn't want to refuse. "All right, it would be my honor to perform for you, beautiful lady," he said, slightly bowing to her in greeting. He untied the reins from the tree, nimbly mounted the horse again, and said to her, "But I haven't practiced in a long time, so I'll show you a few basic movements." After saying that, he quietly gave the horse a command, and his mount immediately got into position, first trotting in place at his command, then changing direction to walk back and forth, and performing a few lateral steps. She watched, somewhat mesmerized, especially when the horse's hooves danced in a fancy step. Her mouth fell open in surprise at how he could control such a powerful animal with body movements and a few simple commands. The horse seemed to be dancing ballet, its steps precise and dazzling, elegant yet spirited. She thought only humans could dance ballet. The best dancers she had seen at her church school were no better than this. He leaped down from the horse, holding the reins with both hands, standing still and smiling at her. "This requires regular practice. I've forgotten many of the steps. Both humans and horses are the same, but she performs better than I do." The horse seemed to understand his praise, kicking its front hoof and blowing air through its nostrils. She stared at the horse under the tree, dazed, unable to speak for a long time. He did not receive flowers, applause, or the praise he deserved. Although dressage was not his strong suit, it was still part of the Olympic gold medal. His performance was far from mediocre, which left him somewhat disappointed. After tying the horse, he sat beside her, exhaling slowly, and said, "Only through time spent together can one appreciate that horses are humanity's most loyal companions, a part of a rider's life. When you are with this noble, spirited partner, you forget many worries and troubles. When the horse's mane flows in the wind and gallops across the earth, that feeling of mutual understanding and unity is simply wonderful." Kanye continued to stare blankly at the horse, listening to him speak softly in her ear. He noticed her distraction, paused his words, and slightly lowered his head to observe her profile. She remained silent, her striking black and white eyes blinking, her delicate brows slightly furrowed, gently biting her rose-colored lips as if pondering some profound question. He chuckled softly but did not interrupt her thoughts, turning his gaze towards the horse, aligning his sight with hers. In her heart, she marveled at how well designed this sporting competition was, maximizing the display of strength and beauty, elegance and rhythm, coordination and exuberance. She now fully understood why he was often referred to as the elegant Black Knight of Atlantis. Previously, she had only remembered his brutality, coldness, and unfathomable darkness, neglecting the essential meaning of that title. He was an elegant rider. She recalled her teacher discussing the chivalric spirit of medieval knights, the necessary humility and kindness, honor and sacrifice, bravery and faith, honesty and justice, which bore some resemblance to the benevolence, righteousness, propriety, wisdom, and trust taught by her private school teacher, just with an added gentlemanly demeanor and a sense of narrow-mindedness. The soft, warm spring breeze blew over the riverbank, and the unicorn-like pure white horse quietly lowered its head to graze, while the handsome man with golden hair and blue eyes gazed at her. "I want to eat cherries," she suddenly blurted out. "Darling, what did you say?" he asked, somewhat puzzled. This little one had a quick mind. Just a moment ago, they were discussing the Olympic equestrian competition, and suddenly she switched to food. He couldn't recall any mention of cherries in his previous words. "Are you hungry?" She flashed him a shy smile. "What does it look like now? When will it bear fruit?" "I love cherries the most." "The cherry orchard." He was taken aback by her words. "What cherry orchard? Don't you remember? It was when you brought me back, and you told me in the car that you had an estate by the Rhine, with an old butler named Martin guarding it. Spring comes early there, while it's still chilly here. The trees there have already budded." He bit his lip, pondering for a long time, then smiled. "Yes, the cherry orchard. It should have grown tall by now, but we have to wait until summer for the cherries to ripen. Then promise me you'll take me to eat cherries in the summer." She stood up from the ground, brushing off her pink dress, which, it seemed, had not a speck of dirt on it. She appeared eager to play with the horse for a while. He looked up at her, a clear stream flowing in his blue eyes, smiling without speaking. "What? Is that not possible?" She turned back to ask him. "Of course it is, darling." He chuckled, but his tone was somewhat serious. Hearing his promise, she turned around with relief, approaching the horse with light steps, cautiously reaching out to touch its pure white mane. He watched her back, his brows slightly furrowed, silently thinking that the cherry orchard by the Rhine would not be hard to take her to, but before that, he needed to quickly plan to buy a piece of land, have cherry trees planted, and find an old servant named Martin. A week of vacation quickly passed, and before long, it was the weekend. He had specially arranged this small gathering. To avoid drawing attention, he wore the black uniform of the SS but did not display any military rank or medals. Unless one was an expert, they would never guess that the handsome man sitting by the window was a general of the empire. The tall man who entered through the door also held a significant military rank, not to mention he possessed a silver oak leaf medal that would make any imperial citizen envious. However, he did not wear it, opting instead for a low-key grey suit. "Hey, Philip, been busy lately?" He raised his long fingers and greeted the newcomer. The well-built man, who also had a somewhat refined demeanor, clearly rushed over. "Sorry, I'm 2 minutes late," he said, taking a seat and slightly catching his breath. Reflexively, he adjusted his glasses on the bridge of his nose and answered the earlier question. "I was rushing to finish an experiment report when my assistant suddenly told me you were looking for me, and the reason was that you wanted to drink." "Yes, I just wanted to drink." He tossed the menu aside and lazily leaned back against the wide sofa chair. "That's quite the excuse. Don't you need to be at the base? How's it going over there?" Philip scrutinized him. "It seems you've been quite free lately. You look much better than when I last saw you at the Opera House." He chuckled softly, his gaze fixed intently on his friend. "It's only natural for me to inquire about your work, but your curiosity about mine is a breach of discipline." Philip ignored his comment, slightly tilted his head, and snapped his fingers to summon the waiter. "Sir, how may I assist you?" A neatly dressed black-clad waiter bowed and approached his chair. "I've already ordered for you a serving of cheese-baked escargot, Italian coffee, and a Black Forest cake," he emphasized, "2 pieces." As he spoke, he slightly lowered his head and raised his eyes to Philip. "I brought 2 bottles of champagne, join me for a bit." He poured half a glass of amber-colored wine. "Thank you, I think this is enough," Philip politely declined the waiter. "What about your female assistant? Annabelle, why isn't she here?" He placed half a bottle of champagne on the table, cradled his glass, and swirled it a few times under his nose, as if savoring the aroma of the wine, smiling as he asked. "She'll be here shortly." Philip glanced at the wine in his glass. "Someone has to clean up the laboratory." "Humph, is that girl really your assistant? You truly are wasting her talents. Sorry to interrupt, sir, but this is the dessert you requested to be served before the meal." The black-clad waiter stepped forward lightly, holding a large platter with only a delicate small dish in the center, which contained a piece of cake covered in chocolate crumbs and a bit of red jam. He frowned slightly, noticing that Philip's grey eyes had been fixated on the cake since it arrived. "I ordered 2 pieces," he repeated. "Are you sure it was 2 pieces?" Philip turned to look and asked, "What about the ladies?" "Both pieces are for you, the ladies need to maintain their figures." He swept a meaningful glance over Philip's white shirt, where a slight bulge of his strong chest was visible beneath, and chuckled softly. He bit his lip but couldn't help but continue, "You usually wear a uniform. It's been a while since I've seen you in casual clothes. I must say, your figure has become even more full and charming. Is today some special occasion? Celebrating with such expensive champagne?" Philip took his teasing as mere background noise, lifting the champagne bottle in front of him and scrutinizing the small print on the brown label. "I'll tell you that later." By the way, I haven't ordered for your beautiful assistant yet. What does she like to eat?" He handed the menu to Philip. The waiter stood before him, and Philip seemed to barely flip through the menu before looking up at the waiter ready to take notes. "I'll have a red wine sirloin steak, medium rare, a caramel-flavored coffee after the meal, a glass of Chivas Regal, and a caviar salad." "Wait, or maybe a fruit salad." He flipped through the menu again, uncertain. "Pineapple or blueberry." Below is a layer of crispy potato cakes, topped with a hodgepodge of fruits and cheeses, piled high. He interjected, gesturing with his long fingers. "Yes, sir." The waiter suppressed a smile. "That's the fruit tart in front of the ladies at the next table. It's a new specialty of the restaurant." The two men simultaneously looked toward the neighboring table, where two elegantly dressed blonde ladies were leisurely sipping from a small pot of red tea. One of them, facing them, was popping a piece of fruit into her mouth. She seemed to realize something, her expression changing slightly, and gently nudged her companion's hand. The other girl turned her head, understanding immediately, and glanced over, quickly covering her mouth to stifle a gasp. Seemingly oblivious to the girl's astonished gazes, he asked, "How is it?" Philip nodded slightly. "All right, let's have one." The waiter bowed and retreated. He raised his glass, ready to suggest a toast with his friend, but saw that Philip had already unfolded his napkin, picked up a knife and fork, and gently cut a piece of cake, popping it into his mouth with a raised eyebrow, clearly enjoying it. "My God, how can you eat something so sweet and rich? Don't underestimate this cake. It incorporates such wonderful ingredients: tart cherry flesh, sweet pure cream, slightly bitter chocolate, and of course, the essential rich cherry liqueur. Only cherries from the Black Forest, cherry juice, and cherry liqueur can create this unique fermented flavor. A perfect Black Forest cake should withstand various picky tastes. It constantly tempts your taste buds. Isn't that exquisite?" He spoke slowly but quickly finished the piece of cake, elegantly wiping his mouth with the napkin. He covered his mouth, noncommittal to Philip's words. "Anything that comes out of your mouth sounds profound and obscure." He paused slightly, then chuckled, "It's just a piece of cake, isn't it?" Philip ignored him, a faint smile playing at the corners of his mouth. He signaled the waiter to take away the plate and lightly brushed the napkin under his glass, as if there had never been any trace of food on it. "Is your new experiment going smoothly? If you need financial support, just let me know." "So far, the progress is quite smooth, but if we continue according to plan, we don't have enough women of childbearing age." His ice blue eyes fixed on Philip's prominent nose, quietly listening as he continued, "I've already submitted a report. Perhaps we can use some women and children of similar races as supplementary for the plan. Is that your plan?" He interrupted Philip, not pursuing the topic further but changing the subject. "So, Philip, as a doctor, do you really think Aryans need to evolve completely to become superior?" Philip squinted his grey eyes, looking at him incredulously. Are you trying to lead me into a criminal statement? According to official statements, that's indeed the case. Don't worry, buddy, I'm just testing whether your stance is firm. He chuckled, raised his glass, and took a sip of wine, seemingly toying with the glass, his gaze inadvertently landing on the two beautiful blonde girls at the next table, who had been glancing over and whispering to each other, discussing animatedly. He was confident he didn't need a listening device to know the content of their conversation. His gaze suddenly flickered, the ice blue focus shifting away from the two pretty girls, as a beautiful woman appeared in the doorway, her graceful figure catching his attention. She had black hair and black eyes, wearing a plain blue floral dress with a white woolen shawl draped over her shoulders. The long dress, which did not reach her ankles, had an uncommon cut. It fit her upper body perfectly, while the hem opened at the bend of her legs, accentuating her curvaceous figure. She noticed the two of them, smiled slightly, and walked over lightly. Annabelle, you're here. Philip stood up to pull out a chair for her. I don't think I need to introduce you again, this is General Ryan of the SS. Sorry, General, it's an honor to meet you. I'm late because my mentor is very strict about follow-up work. I've told you many times, Annabelle, not to call me mentor outside. The girl playfully stuck out her tongue, and he captured her mischievous expression in his grey eyes. Calling me that makes me feel much older. How could that be? In our eyes, you will always be so young and accomplished. You restless young ladies are gossiping about your mentor behind my back. He smiled, no longer paying attention to the back and forth between Philip and his female assistant, having realized that she seemed to have been in the restroom for quite a while. Excuse me, I'll be right back. He stood up and walked toward the restroom. Her complexion looked a bit pale as she pushed the door open. He quickly stepped forward and wrapped his arm around her shoulder. What's wrong, darling? Are you feeling unwell? Kanye shook her head, forcing a smile. I'm fine, it must be something I ate this morning that didn't sit well. I'm feeling much better now. In reality, she had thrown up all her breakfast. He knew it must be the result of forcing her to eat too much fatty meat. Her stomach wasn't used to greasy food. Poor little thing, he said, taking her arm. Let me introduce you to a friend, I think you'll be happy to meet her. Kanye was led by him to the side of his friend, the tall bespectacled officer, and a black-haired, black-eyed Eastern girl, who was dressed very strikingly today in a fitted kipao, paired with a woolen lace shawl. Looking at the familiar cut and style, she could hardly believe she was in Europe across the ocean. Kanye! It's you! How wonderful to see you again! Annabelle stood up from her chair, grabbed her arm, and pulled her down. Annabelle, hello! Kanye smiled and greeted the enthusiastic girl. Call me Annabelle. Kanye nodded, still slightly turned away, feeling somewhat uncomfortable under Philip's scrutinizing gaze, even though he had softened considerably and was trying to engage her in conversation. "I just ordered for the two ladies without asking. I hope you like it. If you want to eat anything else, just ask him. After all, he's treating today." "Thank you," Kenyi replied softly, but she did not look at Philip, instead glancing up at him. The two girls chatted happily in their native language, seemingly forgetting about their presence entirely. The exchanged glances between the two men made them realize something. Annabelle smiled and suggested, "Kenyi, look, there's some fruit over there, let's go get some." Watching the two girls walk to the far end of the restaurant's long corridor, he finally couldn't help but speak up. "Hey, Philip, do you understand that language?" Philip adjusted his glasses on the bridge of his nose, frowning slightly. "I understand part of it. It's one of the most difficult languages to master in the world. Their language, like their way of thinking, has almost no logic or norms to follow. For example, frost, rain, and snow are masculine, but to them, they can be both masculine and feminine, existing in harmony, and at times, can even switch between the two. You're right, sometimes it's hard to tell what they're really thinking." He laughed as he spoke. "Are you a sinologist? By the way, that girl of yours is wearing a nice dress today. I don't know much about this eastern country, aside from tea and silk, but I can answer your question. It's called gown, said to originate from the nobility of the last dynasty." Philip paused for a moment, smiling as he continued, "Actually, as lovers, they are just perfect, petite, exquisite, charming, and gentle. They also have a unique shyness. It's hard to imagine those words coming from you. I thought you had no interest in women." Philip smiled silently, clearly having initiated this topic himself, merely echoing what he wanted to hear. He then shifted the conversation quite seriously, saying, "I've heard that the new Far East military mission has begun recruiting. This is no longer a secret within the army. The Führer's plan is quite wise. Gold and silver will never change color with the owner's skin tone." As he spoke, his gaze remained on the two charming girls approaching from a distance. He saw that she was holding a small plate piled high with fruit, while her companion had a similar plate filled with various fruits. However, her plate only contained apples, both red and green. He lowered his head, smiling helplessly. This was the only fruit she had managed to force him to eat after much effort. "Annabelle, it seems we've taken too much." Looking at the entire plate stacked like a small mountain of fruit, Kenyi frowned and said. The two girls walked towards their seats, each holding a plate of fruit, when Kenyi suddenly stopped, pressing a hand to her chest. "Kenyi, are you okay?" Annabelle hurriedly supported her shoulder, asking with concern. She had noticed Kenyi's face looked a bit pale earlier, but since her mood seemed fine, she didn't press further. Kenyi covered her mouth, her brows furrowed. "It's nothing serious, I just ate too much cured sausage this morning, and my stomach is still churning. Ugh, I can't handle it, I need to go to the bathroom. I'll go with you. Annabelle took the plate from Kanye's hands and instructed the waiter to take it to their table. Gently supporting her shoulder, she walked towards the restroom. He had been watching them and saw this scene unfold, but he merely frowned slightly and didn't approach to offer any comfort. His ice blue eyes scanned the friends across from him, and he noticed Philip gazing intently at their retreating figures, his expression somewhat unusual. After a moment of silence, he finally spoke again about his work. The current mission is quite troublesome, we can't crack the genetic issues with the twins. However, in several of my subordinates' labs, the surgeries for sterilization and placing contraceptive rings are already very mature. They won't have any adverse effects on the human body. Just in terms of this technology, we are far ahead of other countries in the world. Philip paused, lifting his eyes to gauge his expression. You know, quite a few people in the military have come to me for that. If I told you their names, you'd be shocked. Really? He nodded slightly at the waiter who came to deliver the fruit. His ice blue eyes inadvertently swept over Philip, as the black-clad waiter skillfully placed the plates on their table and then politely withdrew. He stared at the 2 plates of fruit, which seemed a bit excessive, and Philip took a small sip of wine, a smile appearing at the corners of his lips. His grey eyes, through the glass lenses, focused on him. But I must keep my patient's information confidential. Then you could open a private clinic to make up for the loss of military pay due to your overdue single status. He replied, his cold expression revealing no emotion as he downed the remaining half glass of wine. Philip laughed even louder. If we're talking about that, you'd be penalized worse than me. You have dual identities in the party and the military. You're right, relying solely on my quarterly military pay, I wouldn't be able to afford food, let alone buy you drinks. He raised his glass, clinking it with Philip's across the table, and downed it in one go. The girls emerged from the restroom and saw the 2 men chatting intimately in the distance. Annabelle linked her arm with Kanye's, helping her to sit on the sofa before returning to her own seat. Are you okay? He turned his head and asked softly. She nodded and smiled back, leaning her head against his broad, flat shoulder. I'm fine, you all continue. He gently tapped her forehead, while Philip lowered his head in silence, seemingly lost in brief contemplation. This year's weather is really strange, it's already March, and it's still cold. Annabelle suddenly said. The 2 men exchanged glances before their eyes fell on her silk black floral dress. Annabelle was taken aback by their gaze, blinking her black eyes and innocently protesting, "Why are you both looking at me?" Seeing her lively expression, Kanye couldn't help but laugh, and Philip looked at her and said, "This is a mountainous area, so naturally, the winter temperatures are lower. This winter has been particularly long, the climate is indeed a bit abnormal." He chimed in. Soon, several waiters took turns bringing out the main dishes, and the conversation at the table began to revolve around the city's climate and various international cuisines. Kanye had little appetite. The dishes he ordered for her were quite light, and there was an enticing pie topped with fruit. Annabelle across from her was enjoying herself, sipping her amber-colored drink, which later turned green. Kanye took a sip of potato soup, put a bit of food in her mouth, then set down her fork, leaning her entire upper body against his strong arm, listening intently to his speech. For some reason, she particularly enjoyed hearing him talk about the weather. The small gathering lasted for 2 hours. When he drove her back to the residence, it was already past 7 p.m. He parked the car, lifted her out of the front passenger seat, bent down to pick up some scattered items from the back seat, and then gently wrapped his arm around her, walking behind her to push open the large door, helping her remove her wool shawl and supporting her frail body. He let her change out of her high heels first. Kanye leaned on his supportive strength, lifted her leg, unfastened the buckle, and took off her high heels, kicking off the other shoe as well. Finally liberated, she stepped onto the soft carpet and let out a long sigh. "Did you have fun today?" He bent down to retrieve her blue velvet slippers and placed them in front of her. "Yes." Kanye looked back and replied, but unfortunately, the small gathering ended too early. She hadn't had enough time to chat with Annabelle. However, since her stomach was still uncomfortable, she had to return early. "Annabelle said she would come to play with me when she doesn't have classes. Is that okay?" "Of course." He looked down at her and replied. In fact, that was his intention, to introduce her to a friend, another girl from South Africa, who should be able to get along with her. It turned out his decision was correct. They hit it off very well, leaving him as the intermediary, and of course, Philip was not much better off. Although in the end, that guy didn't understand that the real reason for organizing this small gathering was to invite Annabelle, not him. "I have to rush back to the base early tomorrow morning. You'll be home alone." He paused slightly and added, "I won't be back until next Saturday afternoon. Can you not go?" She buried her head in his arms, hugging his waist and acting coy. "I have to work, darling." He gently patted her back, his tone indulgent. "Didn't you say the military owes you enough vacation to last a year?" She released him and looked up at his face. "Yes, but this is a special period. Being able to take a week off is already the limit," he explained, starting to take off his uniform coat. "Aren't you a general? Is it really that hard to give yourself a break? It seems this general is just a figurehead with no real power." She made a face at him, slipping on her slippers and skipping up the stairs. He watched her retreating figure, chuckling to himself, and continued to remove his outerwear and change out of his boots. He went to the reception room, needing to take this time to organize some documents and prepare for what he needed to bring back to the base tomorrow. This week, he had truly been on vacation, accompanying her on outings without considering work at all. Sitting in a chair, he flipped through several documents piled on the table, needing to get himself back into work mode quickly, as there was still a lot of official business to handle tomorrow. Unknowingly, 2 hours passed, and the desk lamp made his eyes feel a bit sore. Habitually pinching his forehead with 2 fingers, he suddenly remembered something. He had just seen her run upstairs. She had been clinging to him like a little tail these past few days, but today she was unusually quiet. He searched the entire house and finally caught her in the study. She was nonchalantly nestled in the plush sofa, flipping through a book she had just borrowed from Annabelle. At first, he didn't say anything, quietly watching her engrossed in reading. She rested her chin on one hand, her large black eyes and long eyelashes fluttering as she read intently. After a while, she finally sensed something, looked up at him, then continued to bury her head in the book. He leaned against the door frame, his tone a bit impatient. "Go take a shower. It's still early, and besides, I'm not tired at all." She glanced at the clock on the wall. It was barely 8 p.m. She was in the middle of an exciting part of the book and had no intention of going to bed. "I'll be leaving at 3 in the morning sharp." He stood at the door of the study, looking at her helplessly. Kanye responded, shifting her position, still curled up on the sofa. The book was too good, she couldn't bear to take her eyes off it for a moment. "You need to sleep early tonight, otherwise, you won't have any energy tomorrow." She simply fell silent, leaving him standing there alone. "You little rascal, do you even understand what I'm saying?" He clearly could no longer contain himself, quickly stepping forward, snatching the book from her hands. He glanced at the neatly written characters on the cover, furrowing his brow as he couldn't understand their meaning, but he domineeringly confiscated her book, placing it on the top shelf of the bookcase where she couldn't reach it. Pointing at her nose, he spoke in a commanding tone, "Go to the bathroom, wash up, get into bed, and wait for me. Right now." She stood up, and before she could protest, he pulled her into his arms. She opened her mouth to object, but before she could make a sound, he kissed her. His kiss was so intense that she could hardly breathe. She tried to push against his chest but lacked the strength, as her feet were already lifted off the ground. The passionate kiss lasted for a long time before he finally released her lips, reluctantly saying, "Looks like I need to be a bit more forceful with you, you little troublemaker." He swept her up in his arms. Don't, I can walk myself, enough, it's almost 11 p.m. If you say it one more time, it will be too late." On Monday morning, he had to leave before dawn. Kanye saw him to the door, and he leaned down to kiss her tenderly before pushing the door open and walking straight to the yard where his car was waiting. The driver had already started the engine, and the headlights were on. She ran back to the second-floor bedroom, standing on the balcony and waving at him. It was still pitch black outside, but she could clearly feel his deep gaze from the passenger seat of the car. She watched the car lights disappear into the darkness. After sending him off, it was a dreary week. She listened to the radio, flipped through books, wandered around the house and yard. The guards no longer stopped her and even saluted her politely, as if she were the mistress of the house. Every day at 12:15 p.m., he would call her on time. She didn't have to wait because he was always punctual, and just before hanging up, he would tell her that he would call her again at the same time the next day. Every time at this moment, she couldn't help but want to smile, but when the call actually ended, her mood would turn melancholic again. On Thursday noon, Annabelle came to visit her. Kanye had asked the kitchen to prepare a simple lunch and some snacks and fruits for dessert. Now Abigail and the chefs were very polite to her and would try their best to meet her requests. In this small reception room, there were simple, classical sofas and a tea table, and the air was filled with a sweet, light fragrance of lemongrass mixed with fruit. Kanye held a thin booklet and said to Annabelle, "The book you lent me, I've finished reading it. Here, I'll return it to you." "It's fine, no rush," Annabelle said, taking a bite of a crisp red apple and waving her hand. "I should return it to you. This is your original manuscript because I've copied it once," Kanye said with a hint of pride. "What? You copied a book at home?" Annabelle nearly choked on the apple and hurriedly took a sip of tea. "With nothing to do all day at home, besides reading, there's really not much else. What about you? You're busy every day, is there anything I can help you with?" Kanye kindly lifted the teapot and poured her a shallow half-cup. "Thanks, but that's unnecessary. Those are just tedious lab reports. What's going on in Philip's lab?" Kanye asked cautiously. She remembered her time trapped in Drive. Jackson's lab. Although she didn't know what experiments were being conducted on the women and children there, the bloodshed and horror were still fresh in her memory. Research on genetics and heredity. Annabelle sipped her fruit tea, tugging at the corner of her mouth, and said lightly, "By the way, what did you study in the U.S.? "Music and dance, and a bit of everything else, at a church school, such elegant arts." Speaking of dancing, the university's Student Welfare Association has opened a new fitness club. "Come join me for a class. Can I go?" Kanye felt a bit excited. Her life had been too dull and boring these days. "Of course. There's a class tomorrow afternoon for body exercises." Tomorrow is Friday. Kanye instinctively glanced at the calendar on the wall. "Yes, what about Friday?" Annabelle asked, puzzled. Nothing. Kanye's eyes darted to the large clock in the corner, which had just chimed. It was already 12:10 p.m., and she couldn't help but laugh, not even realizing that her mouth had opened like a sweet crescent moon and wouldn't close again. Sure enough, 5 minutes later, the phone rang on time. Kanye jumped up from the sofa and hurried to the room next door on the second floor to answer the call. His slightly hoarse, magnetic voice came through the receiver. She knew they usually only had a quarter of an hour to talk, and the earlier part of the conversation was always small talk. It was only in the last few minutes that he remembered to mention something important. By the way, tomorrow, Annabelle is taking me to her school. There's a fitness group there. He seemed to pause for a moment. Baby, go ahead. Let the butler take a call. I'll arrange a car for you. No need, Annabelle is riding her bike here. She'll pick me up tomorrow at noon. This time he firmly refused. A bike? No, that won't do. I can't trust you to. Listen, baby, give the phone to Albert, I'll talk to him. His tone was gentle but so compelling that Kanye had no choice but to call the butler and hand him the phone, then walked back to the small reception room. Hee, sweet phone call. Annabelle teased her, laughing so hard she could hardly catch her breath. Kanye shyly nodded and sighed. What's wrong? Annabelle stared at her in confusion. Join our Facebook and WhatsApp group for more updates, link is given in description. Rest audiobook will be continued in next episode.